That's the genius of the Kennan long telegram, the recognition that there could be another way. Neither capitulation nor great power war. Of course, the other great genius of it is that it was correct.
The year is 1946. It's winter, February. The United States is perturbed and puzzled because the Soviet Union has declined an invitation to join the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. They want to understand what's going on with the Soviet Union, who only last year was the United States' partner in defeating the Axis powers. So they turned to George Kennan, which made a great deal of sense, because Kennan was not only the number 2 guy in the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. George Kennan was a serious student of Russian history. He spoke Russian fluently. He understood the culture. There was probably no person better positioned, more knowledgeable about Russia to field this question, what's going on with the Soviet Union? It was expected that Kennan would produce a short, crisp State Department cable. Instead, he produced what was, by State Department standards, a massive statement, more than 5,000 words long.
Kennan's argument began with the ideology and the outlook of the Soviet Union, and the belief that there is an implacable and irresolvable competition between the communist and the capitalist world. No amount of reassurance, no conventional diplomacy, for that matter, no concessions that the United States can even make, will change that fundamental conviction on the part of the Kremlin. He also makes reference to the experience of Russian history, and that Russia's history, Russia, which doesn't have natural borders, periodically looks beyond its frontier. It usually sees threats, which in turn then compel it to try to expand further in order to deal with those threats, which of course then just further compounds the challenge of what's next.
Which is it that truly influences the Soviets? It's Marxist-Leninist ideology or traditional Russian nationalism? Of course, they're not perfectly compatible, but just as human beings can hold contradictory views or views that are in tension, so can nation states. And Kennan showed, without making a didactic argument, how the Soviet, this is a close paraphrase, neurotic view of world affairs builds on and then exacerbates the basic Russian sense of insecurity.
The Soviet conviction that we live in this hostile, capitalist, imperialist world. We need to confront these external enemies, and whatever we do, lie, cheat, steal, it's all justified because we are trying to build heaven on earth. It also meant that there was not the urgency of cataclysmic confrontation. That on the contrary, it's okay to be opportunistic. Push out. If you see an opportunity, grab it. On the other hand, if you encounter a setback or counter force or counter pressure, that's okay too. And pull back, readjust, and look for your next opportunity.
He insists that the Soviets will do their best to find those who have economic and cultural grievances within rights-protecting democracies and use propaganda to convince those people with grievances that there are no serious remedies within the system. They must instead overthrow the system. There's reason to worry that the Chinese have adopted a similar strategy today.
Perhaps his greatest insight was also his recognition that the Cold War was ultimately a test of American society and the West itself. What if it's wrong that this idea that communism is actually going to prove itself to be better? What if instead the United States and the collective West gets its act together and that we build a better society, a society which is again, in a head-to-head competition, superior to the world of the Soviet Union. What will that mean then for the Soviet experiment? And particularly if it's coupled with the frustration of their geopolitical designs because of this policy of firmness, of counter-pressure, of containment.
First, he said, the United States is also going to have to show strategic patience. Second, and this really is the beginning of the doctrine of peace through strength, Kennan said the Soviets are not keen for a fight. If they face a formidable military, they will be deterred. And then finally, because they are actually weak internally, American internal strength will be able to defeat them. And he emphasized that America has certain advantages. One is that the Soviet worldview is built on lies about the world. Moreover, argued Kennan, when the United States remains true to the best within its traditions, it's capable of seriously dealing with its own internal problems. Why is cohesion, firmness, vigor so important? Kennan emphasized that we have to also provide a model to other countries that constitute the free world. If we do, we will, Kennan suggests, prevail. In the long telegram, he doesn't mention the word containment, but the basic elements of containment are there. Containment was this middle ground between rollback and appeasement, but its aim ultimately was the collapse of the Soviet Union because of the various internal contradictions and weaknesses which Kennan emphasizes in the long telegram.
That's the genius of the Kennan long telegram, the recognition that there could be another way. Neither capitulation nor great power war. And of course, the other great genius of it is that it was correct, that the analysis not only provided a path out from this dilemma, but that his analysis was so prescient about why the Soviet Union was behaving the way that it was, and also that a policy of a kind of firmness vis-a-vis the Soviets could provide a stable foundation for a long-term policy and ultimately success. We do today continue to have many of the same kinds of debates about Russia, about China, as we were having back in 1946. Why is it that we can't get along? Are we destined for war? The Soviet Union and the Russian Federation are very, very different. However, I think that the recognition, which was central to the long telegram, that conflict is not unnatural, and that there are countries with which the United States has fundamental differences of interests and values, and that no amount of conventional diplomacy, no amount of reassurance can address those fundamental differences. That continues to be the challenge, and that has to begin with a deep understanding of who is on the other side of the line. Who is it that you're dealing with? How do they see the world versus how you think they should see the world? And then how do you manage them? How do you deal with them?